Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Hoyle. I'm with the Xerxes Society's Pesticide Program, and I'm excited to welcome you all today to our panel on community solutions to reduce pesticide use. So I want to start by introducing the Xerxes Society. We are a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to the conservation of invertebrates. We're actually named after the extinct Xerxes blue butterfly, and our mission is to preserve these essential animals. Our major programs include pollinator conservation and agricultural biodiversity, reducing pesticide use in communities, and protection of endangered species. We achieve our goals through conservation planning, restoration, education, research, and advocacy for invertebrates and their habitat. Today, we're going to talk about the diverse strategies that communities can use to address pesticide use. We'll hear from a number of communities across the country that have taken different approaches to tackling pesticides, but I want to start by mentioning that there are so many creative ways to approach reducing pesticide use in communities. We've seen really great examples throughout the years of people taking action in their neighborhoods, from things like forming packs among neighbors to avoid pesticide use in their yards, to joining together to help pull weeds in neighborhood parks to avoid the need for herbicide use. There are also some really amazing community education efforts in place across the country, and we'll hear about one on residential mosquito spraying today. Many towns and cities have also adopted policies relating to pest management, often implementing integrated pest management strategies on city land or taking steps like becoming a B City USA to formalize their pollinator protection efforts. And some communities are even organizing to help introduce and support state-level policy on pesticide use. We'll hear more about the efforts of a few communities today, and I hope that these stories serve to inspire you to consider how your community can take steps to reduce pesticide use. So today we'll be hearing from 3 communities across the country to learn more about how they are approaching pesticides. We're so grateful to these panelists for taking the time to share their experiences with us. First, we'll be hearing from Jesse Cary-Hobbs, who manages the City of Eugene, Oregon's Parks and Open Spaces Integrated Pest Management Program and the city's Natural Area Operations team. Next, we will hear from Peter Helfrich, who currently chairs Decatur, Georgia's Bee City USA Committee. He is a native bee enthusiast and longtime beekeeper who frequently speaks about bees in city schools. He helps to organize Decatur's National Pollinator Week observance, as well as numerous other bee-related activities throughout the year. And last, we'll hear from Anita Amstutz, who lives in Albuquerque and is a longtime beekeeper. She currently sits on the board of the New Mexico Beekeepers Association, graduating from their first class of certified beekeepers in 2015. She spearheaded the 2016 adoption of the Albuquerque B City resolution by the Albuquerque City Council and founded Think Like a Bee, a nonprofit for pollinator advocacy and education. Welcome, everyone. And first, we will hear from Jesse in Eugene.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I'm here in beautiful Eugene, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest, a little backdrop of our community. I hope you guys can make it out here at some point to see the beauty of Western Oregon. I manage natural areas for the city of Eugene, and we have a huge park system here in Eugene. We have about 5,000 acres of park between developed parks and natural area lands. I manage about 4,000 acres of natural area properties for parks and open space. So the city of Eugene has an integrated pest management program. And just start out a little bit about IPM. I think, I'm going to be providing a little bit of an overview about integrated pest management. And, I'll just start by saying, that integrated pest management is really about figuring out different ways to manage pests in your community. And the city of Eugene really relies on a lot of different strategies to help us deal with pests. We have been able to reduce our use of pesticides, and we're very proud of that. But we have a huge task, honestly, and we want to do things right, both environmentally and to meet our community's expectations. So, as I say here, why IPM? Well, I think a lot of parks systems in our communities, we manage to what we think that our community wants, but we don't always know what they want. And what we found in Eugene is that certain places in town have really high level of kind of aesthetic desires in terms of what their parks look like. Some folks are willing to sacrifice a little aesthetic quality to be able to reduce their pesticide use. And I think that's really important for organizations to recognize that we don't have to have the highest standards if our community, is willing to see their parks have a few more weeds in them in order to not have to use pesticides. And that's a really important thing. IPM can really help you reduce your organization's environmental impact. Obviously there's many reasons, and we don't, I think you all probably understand the issues related to pesticides, but I think in general, some of the other techniques that we utilize certainly do, reduce our environmental footprint. And I think having a well-defined integrated pest management program in our case has really increased our trust in our organization, because we have a very transparent system in place. Anyone can see, anyone can go on our website, and anyone can engage in what it is that we're trying to do around managing pests. So we do have a council adopted integrated pest management policy here in Eugene. You see here, sorry, that's odd. Thank you. You can see here that we, in 2014, we, in our city council, adopt a resolution adopting the City of Eugene Parks and Open Space Division's IPM policy, and requiring all city departments to adopt an IPM policy. We also banned the use of neonics back in 2014 as a part of that discussion. So that was a big step forward with us. Parks and Open Space had an IPM policy for about 20 years prior to that. So we were really amongst, many of the first organizations across the country to adopt an IPM program. I'm having a hard time controlling it. There we go. Thank you. So I'm going to give you a little overview of our IPM program. We use the classic kind of integrated pest management program. We start with prevention. So we're looking at how can we reduce the needs to use pesticides right off the bat through cultural practices and design. We establish a threshold, basically. So we think carefully about at what point do particular pests, at what point might they cause enough harm that it is worth it for us to manage those pests. That's a classic, IPM concept that you really need to think carefully about. At what point are you going to take action? We monitor for pests throughout our system, and then if we reach that threshold, then we can take some action. We use a variety of different types of controls, ranging from manual to mechanical and chemical controls. And we also practice adaptive management. So we're constantly learning and evolving our program. Next slide, please. So prevention is kind of the first step here, and this is an example of very high-end playground in Eugene. This is kind of probably our fanciest playground. High level of aesthetic quality. We've got lots of kids in this landscape running around. It's really important when we designed this playground that we thought about making sure that we planted species that were going to do well here, that we weren't going to be having to battle weeds in this landscape and then be looking to some kind of a control mechanism to deal with them. So really it starts with good design in the first place, making sure you have a good irrigation system, that you are careful about your plant selection, that they're hardy plants that can survive the traffic and use that will be in the area. Site preparation is a huge piece of this, making sure that you bring in clean soil when you're doing construction projects like this. And then obviously good plant care along the way. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit about thresholds. Establishing thresholds is a super important part of what we do. You can see on the left-hand side, folks weeding an ornamental garden, a rhododendron garden here in Eugene, hand weeding. So in developed parks for us, the service level or use level of a park combined with the pest threat is how we come up with our thresholds. And in natural areas, it's really the habitat quality of the site combined with the pest threat that give us basically what our thresholds are. So we're thinking carefully about the individual weeds in this case, as you see people hand weeding, that are a problem, and the quality level of the site that we are managing. We're not going to treat an ornamental garden the same way as we would the back corner of a park that is rarely seen or used. Next slide, please. Monitoring is a big thing. We ask our staff, and all of our staff are botanists by any stretch of the imagination, but the example I show you here is a natural area site. This is a plant called false brome, which is a nasty understory invader of forested sites in Western Oregon. It can form a monoculture, so it's really taking out understory biodiversity in forest habitats. So knowing this plant and knowing how to distinguish it from other bromes is a really important thing. I ask my staff to understand how to identify this plant in different stages, and then we use an ocular estimation guide on the right, which is just a way of kind of thinking about what does roughly 25% cover look like on the ground, right? So it's just a way of doing that. We're not asking our staff to bring out high-end scientific monitoring equipment to give us the exact species, exact percent cover, but this is part of us establishing a threshold. We can say, look, if this plant is over 25% cover in a landscape, that's a problem. That's a point in which we potentially are going to lose this landscape to this plant. So that's an example of monitoring to a threshold. Next slide, please. So here are some of the control techniques we take on. Examples include, you can see a big mowing tractor on the upper left. Next one over is the use of shade cloth to remove, basically to kill the plant cover that exists in that location to start fresh. The other alternative oftentimes would be a broadcast herbicide application. This is a way of starting with a clean slate here over time. In this location, they put the shade cloth down, removed it every winter, allowing anything that was on the surface of the soil to germinate. And they did that for 2 years, basically to exhaust the seed bank, and then we're able to replant with native species as a part of a prairie restoration project. These are community volunteers here. Use of crack sealing is a wonderful way to reduce pesticide use in hardscape surfaces, and something that we do throughout our park system as part of our IPM strategy. Upper right is a wonderful example of us using, our staff using bee suits to remove a ground yellow jacket nest, a hornet nest that is in a location next to a Frisbee golf course where we can't have that. This is if it's in that location and people are utilizing this space, someone's going to get stung. And so rather than go out and spray the nest as we did for many, many years, this is an option for us. And our staff have really embraced this once they realize that bee suits really work and that you can, that you can be safe in them. We've adopted this more and more often. Propane flaming, this is a wildland location on the lower left, is another popular mechanical technique. It's basically good for weak-rooted annuals primarily. Mulching is a huge thing. We do a lot of mulching. We use recycled wood chips that we generate from our urban forestry program to mulch many of our sites. Some places do get kind of fancy wood chips, but these days a lot of it's recycled. Hand weeding, of course, in multiple settings. And then lower right is replacing a really weedy location with turf grass. And I think, from a pollinator perspective, it's certainly not the best thing, but I think when, you're bumping against aesthetic pieces sometimes, and, one solution is to find a solution that is going to, shift you away from the need to feel like you need to use herbicides when you have high aesthetic needs in a location. Next slide, please. We use biological controls. So this is an example of the use of a seed weevil for purple loosestrife, and another type of weevil, also a seed weevil, I believe it is, for Scots broom. So these are two prominent, weeds in our neck of the woods, and I know the Oregon Department of Agriculture is one of the leaders in the United States in very carefully testing biocontrols, and as a way of helping us potentially reduce the long-term threats of these weeds in our communities. Next slide, please. And we do use some chemical controls, and I wanted to just, I know that this is a group of folks who are very concerned about the use of pesticides, and I totally recognize that. I am as well. Our organization is as well. We also recognize that in certain situations like habitat restoration, it's really important for us to have this tool. And by limiting it through the majority of our work, we feel like we can use this occasionally when we need to. Excuse me, some water. You see a little bit of spot spraying on the left. You see a cut stump application, which is really limiting the use of herbicides. After the tree was removed, just a small ring around the cambium layer of the tree was sprayed. Lower pictures are pictures of pheromone applications, which are also considered to be pesticides. A yellow jacket trap is a pesticide because it's using a pheromone, which is essentially seeking to trap and kill the pest. Yellow jacket traps are used in areas where we know we're going to have high use, like around picnic shelters. If we put them out in the spring, we can actually capture the queens of aggressive stinging insects like yellow jackets or bald-faced hornets in our community, and reduce the need to then spray potentially or deal with difficult situations in the middle of summer in a highly used area. Another one is a pheromone trap. This black object is attached to a Douglas fir tree, and it's helping us to manage the spread of a native Douglas fir beetle, which actually it can take out large stands of older trees, and where we're experimenting with this in a very kind of high use, important stand of Douglas fir trees, which are aging, and climate change in our area is starting to cause them to be more susceptible to damage, and we're seeing stand die off. So we're experimenting with that as a technique. Next slide, please. So adaptive management is kind of the last piece of this, a really important piece of this. We use weed BMPs. So every kind of major weed that we manage, we have kind of a best management practice lined out for it. what's the best time of year to deal with it? What are the most effective chemical formulations or manual formulations to use? We are constantly adapting these techniques. And so, at the end of every year, we're getting together and we're talking about, did this work? Did it not work? How can we change what we're doing? Next slide, please. This is an example of something you can find on our website. As I said, every fall we document kind of updates that we need to make. Staff make suggested edits. Our Parks Director approves those edits. We keep a running list of the substantial changes we've made to our IPM program, and they appear online on our website every year in January. And then we go over those changes with all of our field staff who are out doing pest management actions in the park system so that they understand how we've changed over time. And you can see an example on the right of changes we've made to our program. That includes currently having a glyphosate moratorium in the majority of our developed park system. And other minor changes, just changes to added a new site or those kind of things all get captured in this document. Next slide. So that's the basic overview. Eugene is really proud to be B City USA. We're also a Salmon Safe organization. We've been, which is an important indicator of water quality here in the Northwest. I want to just give you guys a basic overview of IPM and how it can be used to manage public spaces, public lands, and I'm excited about hearing the rest of our presenters' talks.
Great, thank you so much, Jesse. I really appreciate that great overview of what I know is a well-developed and well-executed IPM plan up in Eugene. So appreciate that and hope you all learned a little bit more about what that looks like on a city level from Jesse's talk. Next up, we will be hearing from Peter Helfrich in Decatur, Georgia. And Peter, I've attempted to give you control of the screen, but let me know if you're having trouble with that and I can click for you.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah. Yes, my name is Peter Helfrich, and I'm in Decatur, Georgia, and I head the B City committee there. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing in the community to address pesticide use. If you could click and forward. So as a B City USA affiliate, we would really love to spend all of our time talking about bees and butterflies, moths, and other pollinator species. But unfortunately, we find that we spend a lot of our time answering questions about mosquitoes and specifically how to get rid of them. Of course, public health is essential, and many municipalities need to take certain measures in order to protect their populations from mosquito-borne illnesses. We're fortunate in Decatur that the city, the county, and even the state, they don't conduct routine mosquito spraying operations here. Decatur is located just outside of Atlanta. And if you could click, Sarah. It's very hot here. And if you could click again. And we actually receive a lot of rain. So the conditions here in Decatur are ripe for mosquito breeding. We have a lot of mosquitoes, and it's something that even though the city, the county, and the state aren't conducting mosquito spraying operations, it's led residents of the city to begin hiring companies that will come and apply mosquito treatments to their backyards. Next slide. So the type of mosquito control that we're talking about is a non-targeted broad-spectrum insecticide. It's usually applied to the homeowner's yard via misting or fogging, a backpack sprayer. Or in some cases, some people will even go to the extent to install an automated misting system that will apply the pesticide on a regular basis. Regardless of the application method, the products that are used are almost always broad spectrum pyrethroid insecticides. They're non-targeted, so they kill not only mosquitoes, but they kill many other forms of insect life, including bees and other pollinator species. Next slide. So here in Georgia, state law actually prohibits lower municipalities, cities, counties, towns, from passing ordinances or laws that would limit or regulate in any way pesticide use. So for us here in Decatur, we haven't been focused on trying to figure out a way to eliminate mosquito spraying via ordinance or code adjustments. Instead, what we've been focused on is educating the public. And we've begun a public education campaign this year that's designed to raise awareness about the hazards that mosquito spraying poses to bees and other pollinator species. So we started with a section of our website dedicated to mosquito spraying, and it's sort of a clearinghouse of information. We've got printed handouts that we can distribute. We've got mosquito spraying signs, yard signs that are available for purchase that people can put out in their yards. And we've also got a social media campaign that we're ready to roll out. And as you can see, all of these things are branded the same way. The idea is that each piece of this campaign can then build on the others. So another piece of this is that we're hoping to work with our local hardware store to display some of these shelf cards that we've designed that will identify some other products that people can use to help control the mosquitoes in their backyard as alternatives to spraying. Click, please. Decatur has a monthly magazine that goes to all of the city residences, and we've been given the opportunity by the Environmental Sustainability Board to use their column that appears in that magazine to deliver our message about mosquito spraying. And then we also have an ongoing program, Decatur Pollinator Pledge, and one of its central tenets is to not use, to forego mosquito spraying. And so that's a big part of an ongoing program that we have here in Decatur for residents that would like to maintain their landscape in a more pollinator friendly manner. So throughout all of these different initiatives, we try to stress a couple of things, sort of an environmental approach, i.e. things that you can control within your environment. So very basic things like eliminating sources of standing water, keeping rain gutters clear, the use of mosquito dunks where water is present, limiting undergrowth that can harbor mosquitoes. And then we also try to stress what I think of as personal controls, things that you can do for yourself. And one thing that has been successful is an analogy with how you protect yourself from the sun. And that's what this little infographic here shows, something that we developed to stress that you can apply repellents to your skin, you can wear clothes that help protect you, avoid certain times of day. The same types of things that you would do to protect yourself, say if you were going to the beach, can be things that you can do to protect yourself from mosquitoes as well. So there's some other initiatives that we're also going to be exploring or executing as the year goes on. We plan to do tabling events at local farmers markets. We're working with the Environmental Sustainability Board on an IPM program, and the city's in the process right now of updating its landscaping policy. And we'd like to go to neighborhood association meetings and present short talks about the hazards that are associated with mosquito spraying to pollinators. So that's a little bit of what we're doing here in Decatur, and I hope maybe it sparks some ideas for y'all out there.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was great. I'm really excited to see how the rest of your mosquito spraying efforts shape up over the coming months and then moving into the spring as people start thinking more about that. So really, really glad to hear about those programs. Thank you for putting them together. Next up, we will hear from Anita Amstutz, who is in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yes, hello, everybody. I wanted to thank Xerxes for your tireless efforts in terms of educating the public about pesticides and pollinators, and I appreciate being on this panel. Very interesting to hear like the umbrella of integrated pest management strategies that Cary-Hobbs talked about, and then Peter in a more specific and targeted way, mosquito spraying. I am going to be talking about how you get down to the grassroots community organizing to get your city or locality or municipality or your rural areas to become interested in adapting or adopting an integrated pest management program, and how we did it here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So you can see this is the slide from our website, Albuquerque B City. We call it Berkey B City affectionately. And the Berkey was adopted in 2016. And I'm gonna put the actual link here in the panel because in the chat box, so you can browse around and look at the whole thing. So what we did was we created a website after we adopted this resolution that said we are the first bee city in the Southwest, actually. What it took, and that time I was a member of the New Mexico Beekeepers Association. I was approached by the president and the vice president of the New Mexico Beekeepers Association board and asked if I would consider spearheading this resolution so that we could become a pollinator protection city. So it took about a year of actually with volunteers, myself included, from the bee community, visiting every single city councilor, there's 9 of them, and their policy analysts in their office, taking them jars of honey, visiting with them, asking them to look at this resolution, to see which parts were problematic, which parts they wanted to adopt. And the resolution is on our website here, and it's also Berkey B City, which is part of Xerxes now, also has resolutions that you can see for many cities that have adopted one for their own locality. But so we laid the groundwork for a year, and in 2016, the city councilors did approve it unanimously. It did not mean that there were not some people who had reservations about how it might impact the chemical companies and their profits margins, but everybody could come to the table and agree that we did need to have a way to protect pollinators because of the 44 to 50% losses that we were seeing. So we started with this resolution. We created this website. I began with volunteers to visit neighborhood associations. There's also 9 of those. Asked to visit with them, talked with their president, brought lots of literature. We also had many flyers and pamphlets, you know, that we created that we would bring to these neighborhood association meetings, because we felt that what was really crucial was that neighborhoods get on board with this, that if it's just a resolution that is shelved and has dust gathering on it, it's not going to be good for anybody. And it was actually embedded in the open space division, which is under the Parks and Recreation. And so the open space division would be the one who writes the annual reports, helps us do the annual pollinator festival every year, and helps us do marketing and other and such things through their department. But it was the communities, the neighborhoods actually, that we felt would really be the ones to incorporate these values into their these practices, because they wanted beauty, they wanted flowers, they wanted pollinators, and they cared about bees. And so that was actually one of the principles of the resolution, that communities have the ability to demand from their city councilor how they want to manage their open spaces, their medians, their their shared spaces, and how to care for those, either with no pesticides, with an integrated pesticide management, or with lots of pollinator corridors. So those were really critical first steps in getting this out into the community. We did TV spots, radio spots, tabling, as Peter talked about. That's one way to get the word out there. But one thing we found pretty quickly was that the city departments are all kind of in their own silo and didn't work across departments a lot in terms of integrated pest management. And so we had a meeting with all the department heads, and the ones that were most critical for pollinators were Parks and Rec, Environmental Health, which does mosquito spraying, and Solid Waste, which does our median strips and our sidewalks, our highways and byways, you know, and then also the forester department. And we sat down with the heads of all these departments, and we laid out the resolution, and we began to find out what they did and didn't do. When we found out they used biological control for trees. The forester was a beekeeper himself, so he didn't use neonicotinoids, which have been really indicted in bee losses around the world. We found out that Solid Waste was worried because they used a lot of chemicals on their median strips and along sidewalks and streets. But they went on to really adopt this and created something called the Clean Cities Initiative with a wildflower project in it. And so they began to plant wildflowers in our median strips and along our sidewalks. And that really took care of a lot of need to spray or even manual removal, mechanical removal. And their sprayers are willing to listen to what we said was that please don't spray even weeds when they're in flowering mode, because that's when bees will visit them. And so we worked with the departments about when's the best time to spray or do those kinds of, management for insects or weeds, and when not to do those. One thing with environmental health was they set up a zones so that if you had beehives and you wanted them not to spray within a 1 mile radius, you could call them and ask for your zone or your address to be, they would put it on a map and they would not spray. So that's been really helpful for me because I have beehives in 3 or 4 different zones around the city. And we found out that we could call and ask them not to spray for mosquitoes in those places. One thing that we started working with the state, New Mexico State University has never had a big entomology department or worked heavily with in terms of bee research. But they were able to set up something called Driftwatch, and Driftwatch, and it's www.driftwatch. If Molly or Sarah, you can find it and put it up there in chat. Driftwatch is I think a national organization where you can, as beekeepers, drop a tack and it will show those who are applicators or sprayers in the agricultural community, if they use it, to not spray, or at least to let you know if they're going to spray. So Drift Watch was a way for beekeepers also to be aware of where agricultural zones where they are spraying using possibly neonicotinoids. So Sarah, if you can throw up the next slide, which is about we can see the Berkey B City resolution is embedded under Parks and Recreation, and you can see just some information about weeds and native seeds. And we also have Go Chemical Free, which is about how other sorts of things that you can use, kind of like a backyard IPM, you know, to avoid using sprays, you know, mechanical ways to control weeds, or alternative things like gardener's vinegar and things like that. So the next slide, I think, is going to show this is a neonicotinoid fact sheet. And so this past year, the New Mexico Beekeepers Association was ready and willing to support this neonic. It was an update to our Pesticide Act, which would actually restrict neonicotinoids in particular in our backyards. So you can see that the first page really talks about how neonicotinoids have been found to threaten and really destroy pollinators. They can be found in the plant up to a year after they're sprayed. Neonicotinoids have been found by Dr. Marla Spivak, who works at the Bee Lab in Minnesota, to really create problems with neurophysiological problems with worker bees. They lose track of their kind of tracking, their ability to organize, their ability to go out and pollinate. They become confused. So neonicotinoids have been really indicted in that way, and also with queen fertility, reducing queen fertility. And over time, the residual effects of even little bits of neonicotinoids build up and accumulate in the pollen and the honey. And so this New Mexico Senate bill that we are in the legislative action right now as we speak, our state is holding its legislative session. This neonic bill would ban the sale and use of neonics for residential use. It would create certain labeling requirements for flowering plants or products that have been treated with nicotinoids, requires licensure to apply them in commercial ag, and requires a continuing ed for all licensed applicators every 2 years, and development of educational and outreach materials. And then we wanted to make sure people knew what it would not do, which would mean apply to neonicotinoid products for indoor use. They're used heavily for, you know, like fleas, ticks on domesticated animals, bed bugs, lice, things like that. And they would not restrict wood products treated with neonics. So this is one thing we're doing at a state level, and hoping that it passes. If it doesn't, another thing that we are working with New Mexico State University, the IPM specialist there, is to create a Managed Pollinator Protection Act plan, MP3, Managed Pollinator Protection Plan. And many states have adopted this now, and we're doing this with NMSU because that would give it a scientific, weight, and also allow all of us to learn as we're working on this committee to create a plan, bringing stakeholders to the table on how we all together, even agricultural stakeholders, honeybee stakeholders, gardeners. We'll see who all comes to the table, but how do we all work together to create a plan so we know the best way that we can work together with creating an IPM for the state. And so we've moved from a locality, which is Berkey B City, and now we're moving towards state legislation, which is, I think, in the end, the way to go really, although I think you have to start with your locality. So yeah, I think I'll stop there because the last thing that we're working on is a climate resilience or a climate emergency plan with the city of Albuquerque. And one thing they really are looking at is pollinator corridors and how to regenerate soil and create habitat and water conservation and things like that. And so these are all pieces and parts of many different agencies that are working on this. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anita. I really appreciate hearing more about what you are all doing in Albuquerque and at the state level in New Mexico. That's really exciting to see your advocacy there as well. So I just wanted to thank all of our panelists, and we'll move into questions in a moment. But before we do, I just wanted to mention that we do have quite a few Xerxes resources available, as well as resources on all of the communities that we've heard from today's website. If you want to learn more about what they are doing and things that they've talked about, take a look there, but also feel free to check out our website for more guidance, and always please feel free to reach out to Xerxes staff. We're here to answer your questions and help you think about how your community can best address pollinator conservation and pesticide reduction and other issues related to invertebrate conservation. And lastly, I just want to thank all of you for participating today, and especially thank any of our Xerxes members and B City USA affiliates. If you're interested in becoming a member and supporting our conservation work, you can join us online at xerxes.org/donate. And with that, let me open up the Q&A box and we can take some questions. Just a moment. Okay. So I'm seeing a few different questions here, starting out with a few for Jassy and Eugene's programming. A couple folks are asking about a little more detail on some of the biological controls that you're using in Eugene, and then also interested in your use of volunteers and their availability to help with some of the parks management and mechanical controls.
Yeah. So I'll start with volunteers. We have a fairly sizable volunteer support portion of our organization. We have 3 full-time volunteer coordinators who help us manage, is that right? 3? Yeah, 3, and manage our park system, both natural areas and developed parks. We have a handful, 7 actual parks that are designated as pesticide free, and they're kind of typically small neighborhood parks where we have a high level of volunteer commitment from the neighborhood. And so those neighborhood groups have agreed to help us do things like, add wood chip mulch, to landscape beds and those kind of things on a fairly, and help weed landscape beds on a fairly regular basis. We are currently not doing that sort of thing in large community parks just because we don't get the consistency of volunteer use, and it's a little overwhelming for staff, but we certainly love using volunteers. And I think that's one of the big cruxes of this, right? In terms of reducing overall pesticide use for communities. When you have a lot of land, at the end of the day, it's kind of an equation of how are you going to deal with it? And we are in a time of shrinking budgets, and every government organization needs more money than they have to do their jobs. So volunteers is definitely part of the solution, and but I think IPM is the other leg here in terms of really getting organizations to step forward and recognize that maybe we just have to change our aesthetic too. And maybe we just have to, get more creative and that sort of thing. Specific questions about the kind of the use of biocontrols.
Yeah,
it's an interesting topic. Obviously, I think we recognize. I think I'm not sure what Xerxes' position on it is, but obviously, anytime you're introducing a non-native insect to help combat a non-native plant, for example, or another insect, it's a slippery slope. And I think we all recognize the fact that it's a difficult thing to do. And then once you've introduced another creature into the wilds, we'd like to think we understand what will happen altogether. And I think there have been some very obvious mistakes in that community over the years. We've also seen some relative successes. And so, in a place like Western Oregon, where I think every state probably has the same examples, but we have seen some plants that we've been able to get under control that were otherwise taking over huge areas and reducing biodiversity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting topic for sure. And
Yeah.
glad you've had some successes with it.
Right.
One thing you just mentioned, Peter, on budgets, there's a couple different questions in here to Jesse, but directed at all three of you just about kind of how you've been able to do some of these outreach campaigns, where within the city your budgets come from, and sort of what marketing and outreach, and then also, general programmatic budgets have looked like for you. So if any of you could speak to that.
Sure. Yeah, so in Decatur, we receive a small amount of money through our sponsoring city department, the Department of Design, Construction, and Environment. Typically, that money is used for pollinator habitat projects, usually the purchase of plants to go into those projects. Most of our funding, though the vast majority of it comes from grants that the B City Committee applies for, fundraisers that we do. So we sell mason bee houses in the early spring. We sell those mosquito spraying signs. We do the Pollinator Pledge program, which has a sign that people can purchase. And a lot of it comes from individual donations, but everything is done on a shoestring. Our annual budget really is only about $4,000 to $5,000. So,
yeah, and I would say for us, since we're lodged in the open space division under Parks and Rec, our annual B City pollinator celebration mostly is their budget. And, small groups like Think Like a Bee, which is a nonprofit I started, and also New Mexico Beekeepers Association, do contribute, their parts of their budget for different aspects of it, for flyers or any public spots, marketing, things like that. But most of it's lodged under open space division. We're doing a really unique pilot project right now with one neighborhood has decided they want to take on beautifying and creating the pollinator corridors that was in the resolution. So we're going to be trying to work with one of our city councilors. They have discretionary funds, actually a pretty nice sizable pot of discretionary funds, and they can decide how to use it. And so we're going to approach them because this particular city councilor was very supportive of the Albuquerque B City resolution, and ask him for funds to buy the plants, to fund, the education efforts for that particular neighborhood that really wants to undertake this pollinator project. So there's many different sources. And as Peter said, yes, it's always on a shoestring, and we're raising money all the time.
Great, thank you. Someone else asked about whether or not all three cities have active volunteer citizen Bee City boards. And I believe that the answer is yes, correct? I think you're all Bee Cities and have pretty active boards. So that's really been great to see. And hopefully it's been a good resource for your cities and getting more information and getting folks together. I think we've got just a couple more minutes for, can you go ahead?
Say, this is very interesting because I just had a long conversation this morning with the Santa Fe community. They're trying to create a Bee City USA. And they asked about our active, committee, Albuquerque B City committee. And I said, well, we don't actually have an active committee right now. It's mostly ad hoc whenever we're doing annual celebrations or we're doing any kinds of public events, but it's really embedded in the city now. And so it's up to them to do the reporting, to, carry forth with the you know, the resolution. So,
Okay, so you've kind of moved beyond the committee phase into pulling it together with the city a little bit more. Yeah, that's good to hear. Great. Let's see. A couple different questions have come in about landscape companies and sort of how you've addressed, I think Peter's speaking a little bit to this with the mosquito control issue, but I think that, beyond that, how have you guys worked with landscape companies who may be taking the approach of kind of heavy chemical controls in city neighborhoods or in private residences?
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, City of Eugene really doesn't regulate private use of pesticides in any way. So, I think that we're trying to set an example for the community and how you can do this and just keep it kind of there as far as our community goes. When it's interesting, I think, many in the community have supported their public lands kind of taking on this approach, but when it comes to crossing over into telling what people can do on their private properties, the amount of enthusiasm seems to shrink rapidly.
yeah, and that's why I would say making this bill that would actually regulate or restrict neonicotinoids, even in backyards, that's the only way you can really go, because you can't, as you said, demand that private companies, this is a problem that we're trying to figure out how to deal with. And also in terms of agriculture, the agricultural sector, there are certain groups that see themselves as exempt from being restricted in terms of neonics, and that's a perennial ongoing issue.
Great, thank you. Well, we've reached just about 11 o'clock, so I just want to thank you guys all for 11 o'clock Pacific. I guess we've got a variety of time zones here, but the end of our hour. So I just wanted to thank you all again for participating. This has been really great. Please feel free to, I know there's quite a few question and answers that are still in the box we didn't have time for, but feel free to email me. I'm sarah.hoyle@xerxes.org. You can find me on the website if you have any further questions, and I can try to get those answered or direct them to our panelists. So thank you again to Jesse, Peter, and Anita for joining us today, and to Molly, who is in the background here as our B City coordinator at Xerxes, and everyone else who made this happen. I really appreciate you all taking the time, and this was really great.